Okay, so let's look at an example of type 1 and type 2 errors in a hypothesis test. According to a report on consumer fraud and identity theft, 22% of all complaints during 1 year were for identity theft. In that year, Mississippi had 328 complaints of identity theft out of 1,462 consumer complaints. Does this data provide enough evidence to show that Mississippi had a lower proportion of identity theft than 22%? Okay, now, the first information we're given is the status quo. It is our null hypothesis. So our null hypothesis is that the proportion is 22% or 0.22. Or we can say the percentage is 22%. Our alternate, on the other hand, is the question. The question is there enough evidence to show that Mississippi had a lower proportion identity theft than 22%? So that's that our percent is less than 22%. That's our alternate hypothesis. Okay, now, type 1 error. In a type 1 error, we reject our null hypothesis when in fact the null hypothesis is actually true. So if we reject our null hypothesis, that means that we are assuming that the alternate hypothesis is true. In this case, we said our alternate is that the proportion is less than 22%. So let's find, first of all, concluding that the proportion is less than. Okay, so it's not that one. Um, okay, so we know it has to be this one because this is the only one that says concluding the proportion is less than 22%. But let's examine the wording here because we're assuming that the alternate hypothesis is true when in fact the null was actually true. So let's notice that we concluded the alternate hypothesis is true. It's less than 22%, but the null hypothesis is that it is 22%. So it is 22% um, is what's actually true. So our type 1 error, we have concluded that the alternate hypothesis is true when in fact the null hypothesis was really true. All right, now let's keep that in mind now for type 2. Remember, our null hypothesis was that the proportion is 22 exactly, or close enough to be 22%. And the alternate is that the proportion is less than 22, smaller than 22. All right, so type 2. In type 2, we are going to keep our null hypothesis. We're going to fail to reject it, but in fact, it's not true. So we're going to conclude that the null hypothesis is true, but in fact, the alternate is true. So let's find first a conclusion where our null hypothesis, which is that our proportion is 22, is what we conclude. Okay, so let's see. That one's higher. No, we're not concluding that it's higher. We're concluding that it is 22. That's less. No. Okay, so it's one of these two. All right, so the first part of it, we've concluded that the null hypothesis is true when in fact the alternate is true. And our alternate was that the proportion is less than 22. So concluding that it is the proportion is 22 when in fact it's less than 22. There's the right one right there. And make sure you just read very closely what your errors are as you do these, and you should be able to get through them.